A lot of people in Asia are so disappointed in Ethereum.
I think a lot of people globally are disappointed in ETH, and I think that that's true. I don't think ETH is going anywhere. I think ETH has a messaging problem. I can't really imagine our space without Ethereum.
We want Ethereum to be the number 2 market cap, right?
Well, do we? Number 2 slot to be open to competition. I think that that would be a really interesting idea. I mean, among other things, I think we can't forget how Solana kind of came back from the dead post FTX. So I think people who are saying like ETH is down and out for the count are very much forgetting what we've seen other chains come back to do. I think one of the things our sector as a whole suffers from is I'm pretty comfortable with what I see as the macro levers that are being pulled. And I think that there's a lot of effort being put into sort of front-loading the pain and sort of stepping on everything at once. I think for it to work, the fear has to be real.
I'm already scared.
Right, there you go, so It's working.
We're joined today by Blue Maciarelli, Head of Digital Assets at Rowe Price. We'll be talking about crypto institutional trading. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm David Lin.
I'm Bonnie from Bonnie Blockchain.
And great to have you. Let's start with your background. You were institutional TradFi trading, TD Securities, Lehman. You were doing credits. You were at the credits desk, derivatives desk. And now you're doing what exactly?
So I spent 20 years in emerging market debt, Lehman, Elliott, and then I moved into crypto full-time in end of 2017. I like to joke I'm actually only 25 years old. I've just been in crypto for 8 years, right?
Okay.
And ran a market neutral crypto fund for the first 4 years, and then joined T. Rowe to head up digital assets in 2022.
What was the major first culture shock that you experienced going from, large institutional TradFi to digital assets? Presumably liquidity is one difference, but what else?
Liquidity is one difference. I think another one is especially from a market neutral, high frequency perspective, you're sort of plugging directly into a retail exchange and none of them are the same. So it's not the same as, okay, now we're plugging into sort of the New York Stock Exchange, we only have to face one. We are simultaneously plugging into and interfacing with like 8 or 10 different exchanges, all of which are structured, built, different architecture, everything looks different, so it's highly customized.
2017 was relatively early in the crypto bull cycle. I mean, arbitrage opportunities must have been everywhere.
I mean, they were significant. I think a lot of those arbitrage opportunities have, sort of since diminished. I think one of the things that people who are interested in arbitrage recognize is that, at least at that point, 2017, 2018, Bitcoin was the only asset or commodity, right, that is truly 100% fungible. Trades, exact same thing, trades in different places, simultaneously at different prices. So wheat isn't like that. Oil isn't actually like that. Even onshore, offshore, ADR or GDR sort of trading isn't truly fungible. And so it presents a really interesting true arbitrage, which is really, really rare to find.
That's how Alameda Research made their money, but that's a topic for a different time.
For a long time, it was very confusing how they just kept performing so well. And it's like, oh, now it makes sense.
Anyway.
We also want to talk about Ethereum. A lot of people in Asia are so disappointed in Ethereum.
Yeah, I think a lot of people globally are disappointed in ETH, and I think that that's true. I don't think ETH is going anywhere. I think ETH has a messaging problem, and I think that there are indications that they are aware of it, right? And you see it at the Ethereum Foundation they're going through a sort of crisis of conscience, and they're going to come out the other side. But I think that the combination of the true decentralization, the security, the programmability, I think that ETH will come through this. I think that we're destined to live in a multi-chain, multi-token world, and I think there's a role for ETH there. I think that I can't really imagine our space without Ethereum.
But is that good enough? We want Ethereum to be the number 2 market cap, right?
Well, do we? Right? I think that that's a good question, right? I think that it would be healthy for our space for that number 2 slot to be open to competition. I think that would be a really interesting idea. I think that, so I know that people tend to think of sort of, it's like the ETH versus Solana, like back and forth. I mean, among other things, I think we can't forget how Solana kind of came back from the dead post-FTX. So I think people who are saying like ETH is down and out for the count are very much forgetting what we've seen other chains come back to do. I think that Avalanche is, I think it's a chain that gets an incredible amount of traction among institutions. I think it doesn't get the same attention from, crypto Twitter and retail. I think that's a really good question. I don't know why that is. But I think that it's, again, with the customization of L1s, sort of the ability to do a bespoke L1, achieve finality quickly, and there are a number of features which make it something that many institutions are comfortable operating on. If you look at sort of the large institutions and where they've done, their proof of concept for different types of on-chain trading, Avalanche is a leader in that space, and I think that it kind of goes unrecognized a little bit among the DGens and the...
What about Ripple XRP?
So Ripple is an interesting one. I think that I'm very interested to see where Ripple heads in sort of its next iteration, right? I think that they are focused on what comes next, and I don't feel like I have as clear an idea of what comes next for them as I think I would like to.
So Solana, meme coin was the thing, and it died, kind of, sort of, disappeared. Now what? Like, what's gonna affect Solana price?
So I think we saw this sort of very much a round trip based on the meme coin frenzy with Solana. I think that there's like a whole defense of meme coins that I could give, which is always a hot topic at T. Rowe. People are very fascinated to hear that. But I think that we would not see DPIN being built on Solana the way that it is if we hadn't seen the network pushed, tested in terms of throughput, in terms of the ability to transact incredibly large volumes of what is effectively like a low value item. You can't use it for proof of coverage or proof of mapping or any of those things until it can handle huge throughput at very, very low transaction prices. And so
DPIN, you think, is a big topic? It was
yes.
popular last year.
Yes, it was.
But this year, it kind of, nobody's talking about it anymore.
So I think that one of the reasons I really like DPIN is I think it makes our entire industry much more accessible to people. Right? So when I'm not wearing my crypto digital assets hat, when I am like at school pickup and people are like, okay, but what does the blockchain do? And it's like, DPIN allows you to explain that. It's like, this is sort of one of the first places that I think a much broader audience can begin to access this concept of Web3, which is users can also be owners and they can be operators, right? So you'd be amazed like the number of like preschool moms that I've like signed up for Helium, for example, right?
I want to circle back to Ethereum. So you said they have a messaging problem, which means maybe the foundation did not deliver their message very clearly. And also, people are wondering if the business model favors layer 2, but not Ethereum itself. But that is not really fixable in a short period of time.
So I think one of the things that, this is probably not a popular view, I think one of the things our sector as a whole suffers from is a very short-term view of things.
Yes, okay.
And so I think one of the things that exists in our sector that does not exist in other traditional assets is the ability to change and iterate on elements of the economics of the project over time, right? And I think that we often don't give, protocols or projects the time and the space to do that. As an industry, we tend to be pretty quick to write things off. And I think that that's important. I think that we need to sort of let those changes take place.
But sometimes if you are too patient, the project just disappears.
Yes.
So,
it's a fast-moving technology, and things things sort of have this, right, to use like an options concept, things have a time decay as soon as they come on chain, right? And we have a much higher sort of discount rate than any other industry.
Okay, going back to market, so we were talking about Solana. Here's a chart of, while you guys were chatting, I put this up, ETH plus Solana market cap. This is Bitcoin. So two-part question. One, why the underperformance or the Bitcoin dominance, outperformance rather? And two, if you just take a look at Solana versus BTC, there's still a close correlation. Is that still the future of altcoins, which is tracking Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I think we have to remember like how new our entire industry is. And I think that one of the things that you have seen happen initially with the ETPs, right, is that we have seen onboarding of retail, people who were not operating on chain natively. And that process started with Bitcoin and to a much lesser extent, Ethereum. I think that people were faster to understand the narrative around Bitcoin. And I think that you have, to some degree, a schism between sort of tokens that can be traded natively and then tokens or Bitcoin, which can be traded both natively, but you can also invest in if you are not operating on chain, right? And I think that that narrative, that sort of evolution is going to be a really dominant theme over the next, presumably, year, is that there's a schism between what an institutional investor or your average retail investor on the street with like a brokerage account can invest in versus somebody who's operating on chain. And that's going to take time, right?
You are a mom.
Yes.
What is wrong with the financial education nowadays?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think that we don't prepare our children to consider the time value of money. I think that we don't incentivize them to save and to invest. So my kids have been investing since they were 5 years old.
Wow.
5 years old. So the first thing that we did with them was, I don't know if you remember Constitution DAO. So we watched like the what is it, American Treasure, or like the National Treasure movie, and like we looked at the Constitution, then we went on chain, used Juicebox, like contributed to the Constitution DAO, and they were like, oh my God, we got this. Like we're participating in trying to buy the Constitution, right? And it made sense to them. And so we have brought our children, sort of into the world of finance using like largely on-chain tools because it makes sense for them and it works for them. Gaming.
Do they have to work for the fund?
Yes, they do.
How?
So we have them do chores around the house. There's like a reward system. Like there's a reward system related to homework and studying and not beating up your siblings and not making a mess, things like that.
How do you feel about the video game play to earn model? Would you encourage your kids to play like Call of Duty or whatever, but if they beat the quest, they get cryptos?
GameFi.
Yeah.
So here's like
they earn money.
They do. I'm like a middle-aged mom of 3. I am like not the target market for gaming. And so I will often hand things off to like my 10-year-old son and say, okay, like let's like road test it. What do you think? Something that never made any sense to me was the like play to earn model. I was like, I just don't get how that is like an economic model for a game that makes sense over any sort of long-term period. What I do recognize as the person who pays for everything in FIFA, in like the amount, if Robux was like a real currency, like, we would be, we're Robux rich, cash poor, right? So the idea of property ownership in games makes absolute sense to me. I was like, that I can get behind, especially because I'm the one who's buying all of the things. So the idea that they can sort of engage in economic activity, that there are ownership rights that can transfer, I think is absolutely brilliant. And I think that is the piece that makes sense to me in terms of GameFi.
Yeah. Okay.
GameFi is really just DeFi wrapped in a different form.
Yeah,
Yeah, I get it.
I've struggled with it.
Have you ever played games that earn you crypto?
Yeah. I used to make a lot of money. I was like, I'm so rich and I don't sell. And then I'm down like 100%.
Because, right? Like, yeah.
After 2 months.
Well, we've all had that experience of something in crypto, right? So,
yeah.
think we've all been burned by something.
Yeah. It's like, really, have you lived if you haven't been?
Life advice for your younger self getting into institutional finance and trading. Not a lot of women in the big banks, especially on institutional trading and sales and trading side.
So I like to joke that my love language is charts. So there is a lot of evidence that suggests that when it comes to actually trading and investing, that women often make stronger traders and investors. They don't churn as much. So oftentimes, like, there's a study out of the St. Louis Fed, if you're interested.
I can attest to that. I used to churn all the time. I lost all my money.
Yeah, so if you churn, you are always kind of chasing, and I think it's about do your homework until you have that conviction and understand what your stop loss is, but also understand catalysts that are coming down the pike and what is happening. But have conviction that you've done your homework. Trust yourself that you have done the work to sort of feel comfortable in your position. And then, that's how you wear
FOMO?
risk. Do I ever FOMO?
Yeah.
So, sometimes I'm also I'm a middle-aged mom of three. I feel like my FOMO days are kind of pretty far behind me. I think that it's important one of the things that's important for me is to still get out there and do things trade Fartcoin PA.
Are there some common mistakes that institutional and retail traders alike make in terms of principles, their view on positioning and stuff like that?
I think I would say that what I think of as the number one risk oftentimes is aligning your investment thesis and investment horizon with your liquidity, right? So, spreads ultimately always reconverge, but can you stay liquid long enough? So I think that really understanding the difference between what is my investment horizon, where do I think the catalysts are, what is my stop loss, versus what is my liquidity positioning, and I think that's something we see frequently in the highly leveraged world of crypto oftentimes.
Let's say we have an audience, early 30s with 100K sitting on the sideline. What would you invest in right now? Anything, it doesn't have to be crypto.
I think I would definitely do an allocation to Bitcoin. I think that what we've seen in equity markets recently is potentially an entry point. I think I'm pretty comfortable with what I see as the macro levers that are being pulled. And I think that there's a lot of effort being put into sort of front loading the pain and sort of stepping on everything at once. And it makes sense to me. So I think that U.S. equities, I'm not calling a local bottom, but I think that I'm pretty sanguine about U.S. equity risk here over a longer term period. And I would, more than anything else, I would sort of divide it into, 90% long-term assets, investments that I'm going to sit with, that I'm going to hold. And I think that, in my early 30s, 10%, 15% out there to play with and learn is really important.
That was for 100K. Let's up the ante. Let's make that 100 million. Would that change? Would that answer change?
I think that 100 million, I'm much more willing to take alternative asset risk where there's a lockup. I'm willing to have a much longer investment time horizon. And so I think that means I can have a higher risk tolerance and risk profile. My kids have custodial Roth IRAs. So obviously my children are invested in their custodial Roth IRAs quite differently than I'm invested in mine, and sort of as a middle-aged mom, right? So they have a risk tolerance at 5 years old that's quite different from what you should have as an adult with dependents.
Okay, last question from me. I'll pass it over to Bonnie and finish up. You said you're relatively sanguine on U.S. equities. I mean, the markets have been jittery, so why that viewpoint?
What makes me comfortable? I think it's because I come from a macro, an EM, and a fixed income point of view. I think we have seen, if from a policy perspective you wanted to engineer a lower end, back end of the curve, you did not want to cut rates and risk a resurgence of inflation. You wanted to sort of front load what are often perceived to be multiple elements of a structural adjustment program. This is how you would do that. I think I described it to my kids as, it's like we've put ourselves on a crash diet, but like we've put ourselves on the diet, right? So it's, a lot of these elements are still within our control. And I think that it's a very aggressive set of policies meant to front load and sort of engineer those adjustments so that things can return to growth and there's sort of larger space for the private sector going forward, right? Without higher inflation, without, the back end of the curve like bouncing way up.
But I think everyone's wondering, how long is this pain going to last, right? When we talk about short term, is it half a year, 3 months? What are we talking about?
I think we don't know. I think for it to work, the fear has to be real. Like for this.
I'm already scared.
Right, there you go. So It's working, right? So the faster we're all scared, the faster like the structural adjustment is sort of taking hold and coming in. But we need to have like inflation expectations anchored firmly, and I think that's a really key. In my mind, that would be a key indicator to watch is inflation expectations and firming up of those expectations.
Excellent. Well, let's wrap it up here. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.